وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ فَسَتُبْصِرُ وَيُبْصِرُونَ.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa alihi sahbihi ajma'in. Thumma ma ba'd, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. So now we fast forward in the seerah to when the Prophet ﷺ is 35 years old. Remember last week we said between 25 and 35, he's basically raising a family. And this is where a major event occurred in his life. Like the next major event occurred when the Prophet ﷺ is 35 years old. And this event happened before he became a prophet, but it's still very significant. And in early sessions on the Seerah, we discussed events before the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, like the rediscovering of the well of Zamzam and the destruction of the army of elephants. And these events were very important and they were significant, like major things that happened leading up to the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. So these events had a big significant meaning, right? So, for example, the well of Zamzam was rediscovered shortly before his birth, and scholars say this was not a coincidence, but this was the sign of like the foretelling the coming of the Prophet ﷺ and indicating the reopening of the gates of barakah, or blessings upon humanity, because the Prophet ﷺ is born. And similarly, the invasion of the elephants, this was led by Abraha, and this was another major event that occurred before the birth of the Prophet ﷺ and the miraculous defeat of the army, which happened. This was a sign that the Prophet ﷺ is about to arrive, making the coming of Allah's blessings on earth. And we know the Prophet ﷺ was born in the year of the elephants, the year this event happened. And years later, another significant event took place before the coming of the divine revelation. And this acted as a sign of the coming of the revelation. So this is the event we're going to talk about. But the Prophet ﷺ is 35 years old, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he was about to send revelation again, after a very long period of time. He's about to send guidance to humanity. And leading up to, the revelation of the Quran, this event takes place a few years before that happens. So that was just an intro. So what was this major event which happened? This event is when the Prophet ﷺ, like we said, is 35 years old. A major event in the life was the rebuilding of the Kaaba, the renovation of the Kaaba, basically the reconstruction of the Kaaba. And it's appropriate for us to talk about the Kaaba at this time, with Hajj taking place, because what month are we in at the moment? We're in Dhul Hijjah, right? And the day of Arafat is tomorrow, the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, inshallah, and Eid will be on Sunday, and where people are going to return to Makkah on Sunday from Mina, and they're going to carry out the tawaf around the Kaaba, the tawaf of the Ifadah. So we're in, the greatest day on earth is tomorrow, the day of Arafat, and that's coming up, and we know the blessings of that day. And that's the day where what's the best dua, by the way, to recite? What's the best dhikr we can recite? La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, lahul mulk wa lahul hamd wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. So this is something about the day of Arafat and the month that we're in. And so this is related to the topic that we're talking about. So this major event which happens when the Prophet ﷺ, the next major event in the life of the Prophet ﷺ is the renovation, the rebuilding of the Kaaba. And firstly, what are the reasons? Like, why was the Kaaba rebuilt? Like, why was it renovated? Why was it rebuilt? What are the reasons behind this? And the first thing is the structure was deteriorating. So, this wasn't only a renovation, but this was a complete reconstruction of the Kaaba, like the Baytullah, like different historical accounts. They give like pieces of the puzzle. Some historians say that the Kaaba had not been renovated or reconstructed for many years, like possibly centuries. Like it had started to deteriorate and get ruined. Like a property, a house, for example, it needs a renovation from time to time. Your house is getting in a bad state. Some major work is needed. You need to renovate it. You need to plaster the walls. Like a complete rebuild, basically, because the house is deteriorating. After this, the house looks completely new. This is what happened with the Kaaba at this time. So that was one reason. The structure was deteriorating. Additionally, another narration mentioned by Ibn Ishaq describes the Kaaba at this time. It was much shorter than it is today. So if you visit the Kaaba, for example, or you see a picture of it, you'll notice something. You'll notice it's very tall. However, like back then, the time we're talking about, it's only about 6 to 7 arms length high, which is approximately 6 to 7 meters. And this was the height of the Kaaba during the early years of Prophet ﷺ's life, like only 6 to 7 meters high. So 6 to 7 meters, which is about 20 feet, which is the height of, 3 tall people. 3 tall people standing on top of each other. That's how high the Kaaba was at that time. That's much shorter than the Kaaba is now. So due to that, when if you go to the Kaaba, if you visit the Kaaba, one of the things you're going to notice is its height now, how elevated it is, how raised it is, how raised the door is. The door of the Kaaba now is very high, right? The door is very high. But because the Kaaba was much shorter at this time when this reconstruction was needed, like the Kaaba needed to be reconstructed, it was falling apart. It was much shorter. It was less than a third of the current height. The door was much lower. So the door was much lower. Practically, the door was at ground level. And what did that mean? Unfortunately, this made it vulnerable, like to break-ins. Like thieves could come and they could steal from the Kaaba. Some historical accounts they mentioned that the Kaaba was broken into and it was robbed. It was robbed. So obviously, despite the respect that all of the Arabia had for the Kaaba, even the idol worshippers, they respected the Kaaba. Some people even dared to steal from the Kaaba. So the Kaaba was considered so sacred that people stored lots of valuables. You can imagine, if you have valuable things, they stored them in the Kaaba. Like who's going to rob the Kaaba? It's so sacred. Like gold and silver, they stored it in the Kaaba, believing it to be the safest place. Like no one's going to rob, no one's going to steal from there. No one can go down to that level. But despite this, there's still a break-in and they still stole from the Kaaba and they took these things. And that's what we understand. So in addition, like the Kaaba, there was structural wear and tear. The building was the building was like falling apart. It needed to be rebuilt. There was another reason that theft was another issue. That's why they needed to reconstruct the Kaaba, basically to make the door higher. That was the reason why. And thirdly, what's the third reason why the Kaaba needed to be rebuilt? Floods. Floods. So, historical records, they mention severe floods in Mecca at the time. Like there were continuous torrential rains and rainstorms caused like significant water damage to the Kaaba's walls. Like there was so much damage to the walls. There was leaks and further weakening of the structure. Sometimes, today you see like videos of storms. You see, even in the Haram, like you might see strong winds and rain, you know. So this happened. This happened also at the time. So with these factors, like the structure was deteriorating, it was getting ruined, there was theft, there's water damage. These three reasons, a decision was made by the Quraysh to reconstruct the Kaaba. Like we need to rebuild the Kaaba. And like we said, this was not just like a simple patchwork. This was a complete teardown, like a complete rebuild. So what happens next, basically? So the great uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, he's involved in this. So what happens is next, straight away people are nervous because there's a problem. This posed a problem straight away when they thought about reconstructing the Kaaba because the Kaaba's sacredness, like you can imagine, the holiness made everyone really nervous. Such a major like they needed to rebuild the Kaaba, tear it down first, and then build upon it. Like we said in earlier sessions, the Meccans, they were superstitious, idol worshippers. They were scared. Something's going to happen to them. If we interfere with the Kaaba, like there would be like divine interference. Like for example, even for the repairs, they're worried that if we tear down the Kaaba, like the gods might get angry. And if we start tearing down the Kaaba, our gods are going to be angry and we're going to get punished. That's how they thought. Like we can't tear down the Kaaba. And this is obviously what even we see from the event of the army of the elephants, which came to destroy the Kaaba. Obviously, their intention was different, but that made people think, we can't touch the Kaaba, like something might happen to us. So that's when eventually one of the men from the Quraysh, he was the great uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. He was a distant relative of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He steps forward. This man was the maternal uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, the maternal uncle of the Prophet ﷺ's father, right? The maternal uncle of the Prophet ﷺ's father, making him Prophet ﷺ's great uncle, right? So days after hesitation, there's a lot of discussions, what should we do? What do we do? He stood up and he declared that I'm going to start the reconstruction. He said, I'm going to start the reconstruction. He approached one of the crumbling walls. So just imagine, one of the walls was crumbling. He approached the wall and he removed one of the stones, like taking the first step in rebuilding the Kaaba. And this sort of broke the ice. It's made people less nervous. And lots of narrations in the Seerah and the text, many of which are authentic, they provide detailed accounts. Something very interesting happened at this time. What happened? So when he removed the stone, he basically removed the stone. They mentioned something very interesting. When he removed the stone from its place and he puts it on the ground, the stone by itself, it moves and flew back. The stone flew back and lodged itself back into the place where it had been. Can you imagine? Like people are watching. You take a stone and put it on the floor, and the stone flies back and goes back in the wall. That's what happened. You can imagine the reaction of the Quraysh. Like the people of Makkah, they were already nervous, right? They were already scared and very, approaching the reconstruction of the Kaaba. One of them finally says, "We're doing it for the good of the Kaaba itself. What's the problem?" That's what one of the people of the Quraysh say. He grabbed the stone and it flew back into its spot and went back into its space again. Now they're completely freaked out. Like you can imagine, they didn't know what to do. Like you remove the stone and it flies back in. Like, what do we do? Then the uncle, the great uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, he had a strategy. Like he had a plan. What was his plan? At this point, the great uncle, the Prophet ﷺ, he explained to the people of the Quraysh, and this might have been from his own personal beliefs, philosophy, like he basically made a plan. He analyzed the situation. He said, okay, listen, Quraysh, this is a sign from Allah. Like obviously, a stone doesn't fly back by itself, right? This is a sign from Allah. This is a sign from the Lord of the house that we need to approach the reconstruction of the Kaaba very carefully. He gave them a strategy, like 2 points. What was the strategy? He said, number one, we're not going to tear down all the Kaaba all at once. We're not going to tear it all down like a bulldozer coming and breaking it all down. We're going to reconstruct it piece by piece, taking it down wall by wall, rebuilding it and moving to the next wall. Like we're going to be respectful in how we approach this. That was number one. Number two, he said the stone which flying back into its place is a sign from Allah that only pure wealth should be used in rebuilding the Kaaba. Do you understand? Only pure wealth should be used because he reminded them of the condition of the Arabs at the time. Because specifically in Makkah, before and during the early years of Prophet ﷺ, what do we understand? The people in Makkah, what were they involved in? Like they used to have a lot of haram money, right? They used to be involved in stealing, transactions involving riba, interest, shamelessness, prostitution, gambling, other sins like alcohol was widespread. So do you understand? A lot of their money, major proportion of the money of the people in Makkah, their money comes from these haram sources, like these immoral sources, right? This is like haram income, basically. He said to them, to make sure you can't use any haram money, basically, to rebuild the Kaaba, to make sure only pure wealth is used for the reconstruction. Everyone needs to go and find good, pure wealth that's free from any influence of riba, interest, alcohol sales, gambling, prostitution, stealing. Do you understand? Like gather as much pure wealth as you can, and we're going to invest that into rebuilding the Kaaba. And this is what his plan was. So straight away, obviously, this is a lesson for us. When we talk about this, one obvious lesson it comes from this is, and is widely mentioned by the scholars, is the ethics and the morals and the awareness. These are idol worshippers. They're not Muslims. They're idol worshippers, polytheists at the time in Makkah, and they are saying that we have to use halal wealth. Like as the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, having the complete deen. Now we have the complete deen, right? We need to realize that any haram sources of income anybody has, it's basically not permissible, it's not allowed. And be very careful what type of wealth goes in the house of Allah. Like, for example, you might have a project, like they want to build a masjid, for example, and this affects the overall barakah, and blessings of the work in the community. Like, you can't use haram income, you can't use haram wealth to, do Islamic projects. Even the idol worshippers, they knew this is haram wealth, right? So what about the Muslims nowadays? This is a big lesson to really be aware of the wealth, where the money is coming from, and you have to be very careful. And people, there's some people that are involved in money laundering, gambling, crime, these sort of things, selling drugs, and they look for ways to make their money, cover up their money and make it like legitimize it, and they look for like how to clean their money. So, they look for ways to show their money is lawful, and this happens as well. And these people, they make sure that their haram money doesn't get them caught, and people do that as well. But the point is, and yes, sometimes what they do, they even put their money into Islamic projects, and you can't do this. Basically, you can't do this. So you should understand that if someone sells alcohol, steals money, or if you have someone has a haram business, donating to the money to the masjid, it doesn't purify the money. Like you can't use this money for Islamic projects. This behavior, is not allowed, and so only halal income should be used for, sadaqah or any charity, any good cause that you're donating to. And this is what we really understand. And so, like we said, these people in Makkah, the idol worshippers, they understand the same thing. So for us as well, they're saying they were very careful that we're going to rebuild the Kaaba, but even though they were like left, right, and center, right? They use haram, they have haram money. No haram money, they said, is going to be used in rebuilding the Kaaba. So something else very interesting happens after this. Very interesting. Okay, the snake. The snake. So what happens next? Before starting the rebuild, some books, so now, they understand, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to rebuild the Kaaba wall by wall. We're going to be respectful. We're going to use halal income only because we've seen the miracle of the stone. Before starting the rebuild, some books also mention another event which happens at this time, emphasizing the importance of using pure wealth, right, to rebuild the Kaaba. So this is another major event which some books mention. And this is very interesting. And what they mention is that initially, when they approached the reconstruction, they're about to start the rebuild basically, there was an abandoned well near the Kaaba. Like there's not the well of Zamzam, but there's another well which has been empty for a long time, is boarded up basically. A huge snake, a huge snake like an anaconda, like burst out of the well. A huge snake came out of the well, and the snake started to circle around the Kaaba. Right, just imagine a huge snake circling the Kaaba. Like, do you know what an anaconda is? Anacondas can reach up to 30 feet, like 9 meters, which is massive. Anacondas are massive snakes. The snake was described as having a black head and had like a white underbelly with a large body. This massive snake, and this snake, it went up and down the walls of the Kaaba. Can you imagine like a big snake going up and down the walls of the Kaaba and circling the Kaaba like this? And when everyone tried to come close, you can imagine people tried to come close, it would lift its head and hiss, like it would just hiss like that, open its mouth and scare people away. This snake did not let anybody come near the Kaaba. This basically, can you imagine the people are basically just themselves, right? They're like, now they're really scared. People are getting scared, and this snake is scaring people away. And this shows the need for caution and purity again in the efforts to rebuild the Kaaba. Like this is a sign. What is this a sign of? To use pure wealth. The snake is like another sign that you should use pure wealth. And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is emphasizing this point. We understand from this particular narration, this particular event which is mentioned. And what happened is they took this as a sign. They need to be very careful about how to approach the rebuild of the Kaaba. And the people of the Quraysh, they made an agreement. They made a pact amongst themselves, almost like they announced it to the snake. Like the snake is there. They made an agreement loudly. They said, we're only going to use pure wealth, and we're going to be very careful and respectful and reconstruct the Kaaba piece by piece. And when they said this pledge, when they made this pledge, they made this promise, what happened? The snake actually started to go back down. The snake started to disappear into the wilderness. And one narration mentions even a huge bird like a condor, swoops down and catches the snake and takes the snake away. That's what one narration mentions this. But Allah knows best. But there are some accounts mentioned in the books of history. Regardless, they understood, they have to be very careful. And so that's what we understand. So, when it comes to the Kaaba, you can see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does really protect it. And these are signs at every stage that He's giving to these people. So let's discuss firstly, how did they reconstruct the Kaaba? What was the process they followed? What did the Quraysh do to rebuild the Kaaba? So, firstly, now that they know what to do, they know like, okay, we need to be careful, use pure wealth. Firstly, and this is very interesting again, according to the books of Seerah and history, the Quraysh straight away, they got into a fight. Like straight away, they get into a fight, an argument. What happened was a fight breaks out. And the conflict was about who would reconstruct the Kaaba. There was a fight between all the tribes. Because you have to understand, each of the families, major families, like the Banu Adi, the Banu Kilab, the Banu Hashim, they wanted to take on the task. Some of the books of history say that they started taking blood oaths. Blood oaths. Do you know what that means? They got knives and they started to cut themselves like this. They cut themselves, and with their blood, they stamped their blood on the Kaaba like a signature, blood signature. Swearing by the house that we're going to be the ones to reconstruct the Kaaba. Like they're making blood oaths. They began to form alliances as well. The tribes started to get together. Like two tribes, they started to gang up together against the Banu Hashim, because Banu Hashim were the real threat. Like they are the ones who are the caretakers of the Kaaba, right? They're the threat. So the tribes were made alliances about who's going to reconstruct the Kaaba. So three tribes, two tribes ganged up together against the Banu Hashim because they were the threat. So this is what happens. So what happens then? How was this resolved? Like how was this? Basically, how did they resolve this? How did they resolve this? One of the senior leaders of Makkah, and the name may be familiar to you. One of the senior leaders of Makkah, Walid ibn Mughira, he stood up and he suggested at this time that they all should work together, all should participate together. He said that each tribe would be given a portion of the Kaaba to reconstruct, right? So each tribe is going to rebuild a portion of the Kaaba, everyone has to make sure everyone has a share. So, according to Ibn Ishaq, the historian, the side with the door. So, we're going to mention this. What tribe gets what? So, the side with the door was given to Banu Abdul Manaf and Banu Zuhra, right? That's the side with the door. The wall between the black stone and the Yemeni corner was given to Banu Makhzum. And the Banu Sham, so Banu Sham and Banu Makhzum, they had the side between the black stone and the Yemeni corner, right? And they were joined by other Quraysh tribes as well. And the back side, opposite the door, the side opposite the door, this was given to Banu Juma and Banu Sama, right? So this is just some like technical details. Who got what, right? So this is how the back sides opposite the door, this was given to Banu Juma and Banu Sama. Okay, and the side of the Hijr, where the Hatim is located. So if you look at the Kaaba, there's a semicircle bit. The semicircle bit, which is outside the Kaaba, like you can see this, it's got like a wall structure. People, they pray inside it. They try to pray inside this bit because this bit is considered to be like you're praying inside the Kaaba. Do you understand? Like, technically, this is still that semicircle is still a part of the Kaaba. It's still a part of the Kaaba. It's not constructed within the Kaaba, but this is still considered a part of the Kaaba, that semicircle bit. So this bit where people pray in, this bit was given to Banu Abdul Dar, Banu Abdul Dar to rebuild this bit. So each tribe is assigned a specific portion. Everyone is satisfied. Okay, fine. We're taking blood oaths. We were fighting not so long ago, but now we're all happy. Each tribe has a portion of the Kaaba to rebuild. Like there's a compromise was reached, right? So allowing them all to take part in the reconstruction. So that's the last few points here. What was the next issue? But now they're back to square one. If you think about it, whether it's a stone flying back into its place or the snake and the bird incident, they are freaked out again. So now, when it's actually time to start the rebuild, they're sitting around hesitant. Like they're all like, okay, Bismillah, go ahead. You guys start. Each tribe is saying to everybody else, okay, you start. They're all freaked out. They don't want to start the reconstruction. They're all too scared to begin. A while ago, they were taking blood oaths and threatening each other's families, but now it's no, you go first. Please, you go first. They're all very scared. Something might happen to the person who starts to demolish the Kaaba first. So, again, what happens is Walid ibn Mughira, again, he's one of the leaders of the Quraysh, he steps up again. He says, I'm going to start. He grabs an axe or hammer, he goes to the Kaaba, he breaks off a small chunk of the wall, he starts demolishing it. Walid ibn Mughira. And this happens in the evening. After they spent all day making excuses, like, you go first, no, you go first. I need to use the bathroom. Like, oh, I can't do it. Why don't you start? I'll be right back. Do you understand? They're all trying to avoid going first. Walid ibn Mughira, he goes first. Evening comes and he's frustrated and he begins the work, but he doesn't get much work done and it becomes dark, right? But he goes first. They all agree, okay, and this is quite funny. They all agree to see, let's see what happens to Walid overnight. Like, let's see if something bad might happen to him. Let's see if he dies overnight. Let's see if he gets paralyzed overnight, because he actually started the demolition. Let's see what happens to Walid ibn Mughira overnight. And then we're going to know in the morning, shall we go ahead or not? Like, he's our guinea pig, basically, yeah? Walid becomes the guinea pig. This guy, is he going to die overnight? Or is he going to be paralyzed as a punishment or something? You understand? The next morning, who's the first person to show up for the reconstruction? It's a Walid ibn Mughira. Like, nothing's happened to him. He's fine, he's healthy. He says, yeah, I had a great night's sleep. I'm excited. I'm going to resume work now. Seeing that nothing bad happened to him, everyone says, it must be a sign. It must be okay to carry on. The Lord of the Kaaba must be pleased with this effort. I mean, think of the incident, like we said, the incident of the elephants. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he dealt with the army of the elephants who came to destroy the Kaaba. But here, their intention is good, So, you can understand they were scared. So it's also mentioned in one narration that Walid ibn Mughira, first, when he started taking down the wall, he said, Allahumma la nurid illa al-khair. Allahumma la nurid illa al-khair. Oh Allah, we don't intend anything but good. Re-emphasizing that their intention, obviously, because what's he doing? He's breaking the Kaaba, right? On the face of it, you think, oh, he's doing something bad. But what's his intention? To reconstruct the Kaaba. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala obviously is watching them and he allows it to happen. And he says, oh Allah, we don't intend anything but good. So he was essentially speaking to the Lord of the Kaaba, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, saying, we mean no offense. We only want to make this this house of yours better. Okay, good. So they begin the reconstruction and things go smoothly. Last point. Finally, what happens? something very interesting happens. As they tear down the wall, they reach the base, they hit what the books of Seerah say, and the Hadith mention the foundations of Ibrahim. Can you imagine? Like they break down the Kaaba, the walls, they get to the foundation. They've hit the foundation of Ibrahim alayhi salam. What does that mean? They reached the original foundation that was put in place by Ibrahim alayhi salam all those years back. So when they start to tear down the wall, they reach the base, they reach the foundation of the Kaaba, laid by Ibrahim alayhi salam. And some narrations, like those from Imam Bukhari and Bayhaqi, and historians like Ibn Ishaq, they describe the foundation. They say the rocks were green, possibly due to age, and they were jagged and rough, leaning against each other. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, he couldn't order bricks, obviously, right? So he had to use whatever stones he could find to piece them together. When they reached these jagged greenish rocks, they couldn't move them, and they had settled in the earth, like they were like stuck in the earth, the foundation. They realized the foundation was so solid, they said, okay, we're not going to disturb the foundation, and we're going to build on top of it. So one narration mentioned by Ibn Ishaq and Imam Bayhaqi, it tells of a man who bought a big iron rod, right? He bought a big iron rod to fix the foundation. He jammed it between the rocks. He started slamming it to crack these rocks of the foundation. What happened then? As soon as he did it, the ground in Makkah shook and there was a mini earthquake. It was like a warning, back off, don't disturb the foundation, back off. Again, see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at every point, straight away he gives them a sign because he's protecting the Kaaba. Like he tried to break the foundation, there was an earthquake. So a sign, but back off, don't touch the foundation. This man stops, realizing that this foundation was laid by Ibrahim alayhi salam. They understood it's sacred and not to disturb it, so they did not build on top of it. So, inshallah, we'll stop here for now. Next session, we'll continue with the reconstruction of the Kaaba and discuss the famous story which involves the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam during the final part of the reconstruction. And we'll also discuss about the overall history of the Kaaba. Just as we mentioned, the foundation of Ibrahim alayhi salam, when they dug up to it, like when was the foundation of the Kaaba originally laid? Like who laid it? Was it laid by Ibrahim alayhi salam or was it laid before that? And the different narrations will talk about different prophets which came to visit the Kaaba as well, leading up to the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We'll also discuss what happens, in the next sessions, what happened in the first 100 years after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the first century of Islam. Like what happened with the Kaaba? What brought it in the place that we see today? Like how was the Kaaba reconstructed over the years to bring it into the place that we see today, basically? We're not talking about the outside area, the Masjid al-Haram, because that gets updated. Like every time you go for Umrah, there's always building work going on. So we're not talking about the area around the Kaaba, but that's different. But we're talking about the actual the Kaaba itself, the actual square structure. We'll talk about that. So we'll touch on the overall history of the Kaaba, the foundation, and then the different phases of the construction as well. In the first century of Islam, some major events happened with the Kaaba leading to its current form. So we'll talk about this, leading on up to how it is today. So, 3 minutes, that's okay. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to practice everything that we've said and heard. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and learning about his life, and also a love of the Kaaba. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, grant us a true love for him and the messenger. And like we said, as we're in these amazing days of Dhul Hijjah, these blessed days, and this is where the du'as are accepted, especially tomorrow, the day of Arafat. So we should be extra careful as well in the next couple of days. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك